Hi everybody, FIDE Master Dennis Monokroussos here, and we're going to take a look at some viewer games. So we haven't done this in quite a while, and before the quantity gets too great to ever have a chance of catching up, I thought I would take a look at some of them. In fact, I'm going to take a look at just about all of them, not from start to finish with complete comments, but making relevant comments as both as seems to me relevant and also as some of the viewers, some of you guys, have asked me to. So we'll start with a game between Grizzly and Miss 3U. And Miss 3U had black, submitted this, and lost the game and wanted to know where he could have done better, aside from not making the mistake that he did late in the game on move 40. And I would say basically that it was just really some opening inaccuracies and then giving away a pawn in the opening. So let's take a quick look here. So our viewer had black here, and this is a well-known variation, not really considered especially dangerous, certainly for black, but people who like to avoid the dangers of the mainline King's Indian and kind of like to grind the opponent down will sometimes play this. I've used it before as white, not very often, but you know, about 20 years ago it was something that I would play just to avoid, again, what I was saying before, black's kingside play. And I had good results with this, but it's not, objectively, it's not a very dangerous line at all. Okay, now the main moves here are bishop to g5 and knight d5, but white played a rather slow move with castling kingside. And here black can do a few things. The move in the game was fine. Black played c6. Rook e8 is also fine. By the way, for those of you who are wondering, okay, knight takes e5 is not a big deal at all because black can just play knight takes e4. So knight e4, bishop e5, bishop g5, rook f8, and black is fine. No real worries there. Okay, so castles, I said c6 was played, rook e8's fine. And another move that's perfectly good is knight b to d7. Basically, what white's trying to do is try to use as little extra space, and the fact that at some point black is going to have to waste a move or so defending the e5 pawn. What black has going for him, on the other hand, is that this d4 square is potentially his forever. So while d5, white doesn't have as much control over that because black has c6, black does have d4. So certain long-term factors are quite to black's advantage here. All right, so anyway, a sample line after knight b to d7, say bishop to g5, c6, keeping the knight off of d5, rook f to d1, rook e8, breaking the pin. See, knight takes e5 is threatened here because this knight can't move on account of the rook hanging, and this knight can't move because, well, again, the rook hanging. So rook e8, b4, trying to take over some space here. And okay, so in a variation like this, again, you can see white has the bit of space. Black would still like to control d4 at some point. And all right, so in a position like this is from some random game. Black was doing reasonably well. Okay, so this is, I would say, kind of a characteristic line for this variation. Okay, so back to the game. Castle, c6, h3. Again, rook e8 is possible here. And then after bishop to e3, knight a6. But this can transpose to the game. So you played knight a6, bishop e3. Okay, and now rook to e8. I would recommend. Okay, so for example, rook f to d1, bishop f8. So again, we're fighting for these dark squares here. c5, b4, d4, and so on. Knight to d2. And then here, bishop to b4 has been played. This isn't bad at all. Also, in a game between Boris Gelfand and Zdenko Kozul, black played knight c5. And we see, again, some familiar ideas now. So white gets this kind of clamp here on the queen side a bit, and black is getting the d4 square. Okay, black can play a5 here, played bishop to e6 in the game. White played knight e2, striving to eliminate this strong knight. But even so, I mean, black is in good shape here. And the game ended up drawn. All right. One other idea. So from this position, so I mentioned rook e8, rook f to d1, bishop f8. But also possible is the immediate bishop to f8. and then let's say knight c5, and then knight e6, and knight to d4. Okay, so that should give you an idea of what to do in the future. In the game, you played h6, which isn't really a very good idea. Okay, so the idea I think you had was to play bishop to e6, and you didn't want to allow knight to g5, so you got that covered. But okay, bringing the bishop out right away really isn't that important. It's more important to bring your knight towards the d4 square first, and you can worry about the bishop later. So I'd say it's a bit slow. Okay, rook f to d1, and now here again, rook e8, or maybe knight to d7 would be good. So instead you followed through with your plan, but it just loses a pawn. Takes, and now bishop takes a7, and essentially you're down a pawn for nothing, and your opponent went on to win fairly normal fashion. Oh, I will point out one thing later on in the game. So hit this position here. Okay, white played b4, you played king to d8, and he played bishop to f5, and still went on to win, and he's still better, but b takes c5 would have been the best. So king takes c8, king h2. See, now I can understand why he would reject this, because you think, well, white's advantage in this ending is really just because he's got this queenside majority, and so if he destroys his queenside majority, then black shouldn't have any problems. But the problem for black is that the king is too far away from the pawns. So if your king could magically get to f5, well, in that case you would be in good shape. You would have a probable draw, or at least very good chances for a draw. But you can't. So watch what happens. So let's say if g4 to keep the king out, then f3. Takes, king d7, king h3, king e6, king g4, king e5. And now white just makes a pass move, let's say king g5, and wins. Black's attempt to counterattack by grabbing the c-pawns is going to be way, way too slow. So you can work that out for yourself. And if we go back here, if instead of g4, black tries king d7, well, king h3, king g4, king h5, and now g4. And again, white will use Zugzwang to win the g-pawn. So takes, g4, king h4, and it's simple. And again, black's counterplay is too slow. So for example, you can just count this out, and you can see white's going to queen several moves earlier. So he'll queen when black's pawn is only on, what, c4, right? So king d4, g6, c5, g7, c4, g8 queen. So it wins. Okay, so that's all I wanted to say about this game, and let's move on to the next one. Okay, so this was between not Florence Dozer and Giraz, and Giraz is the one who submitted it. Wrote that it was played under severe or extreme time pressure. And I would say that, okay, this game, basically white was just fine throughout, and black just caught him on a blunder. So white's up 3 pawns here, not really any serious compensation. But after knight to f4, white blundered. So a move like queen to c2, for instance, would just be easily winning. But instead, white played queen to e3, and black was alert and played queen to g5. Now, even here, though, got a second break. Now, black is winning here, but not, winning where white has to resign on the spot, and huge with a huge margin. So white does have a way to keep putting up resistance here. So some of you might want to try to figure out what that way of resisting is. So the point is, there's a threat of queen takes g2 mate, and there's also knight to h3 check, followed by queen takes e3. And so a move like queen to f2 doesn't help, because knight h3 check still forks, well, it's check, and it also hits the queen, and queen to d2 leaves the queen unprotected. So it's a loose pieces drop off situation. But if you can't move the queen to protect the mate, maybe you can move the king to protect the queen. So instead of g3, which was played and led to an easy black win after knight h3 and queen takes e3, white could have played king f2. And now, okay, again, black is winning, but he has to find some moves still. So queen g2, king e1, and now maybe the best is rook takes d5. And the cute tactical point is that after queen takes f4, black has rook to d1 check, queen f1 check, and then queen f2 check, and yet another loose piece drops off here. So queen d2, queen a7. Okay, but still, after queen to d4, there's some work to be done. I mean, black should win this. He's the exchange ahead, but it's the exchange for a pawn. And again, there's still some kick left, still some fight. So always, try to be aware of these possibilities here, that you can still fight even in a bad position. So you missed something, still take a deep breath, kind of clear your mind, and look to see if there's any last chance in the position. Okay, next one. All right, so this is between some anonymous player and someone who goes by Chess Lectures. And basically it's just showing off a little cute trappy idea against what at least seems to be a trappy idea in the Alyekin's defense. Okay, so this will be clear momentarily. Okay, so he's black in this idea, and his little trick works against 2 bishop to c4. And I think his idea shows perfectly well why this ought to be avoided. So white's idea is that after knight takes e4, bishop f7, he's going to regain the piece and kick around the black king. So this is the idea. If the king goes to g8, then we have queen d5 check and we still pick it up. And if g6, well, the same thing. So whether black plays g6 or king g8, queen d5, queen takes e4 happens. But the thing is, okay, after this actually takes place, let's take a look at this position. Black's king is perfectly safe. He's got the bishop here, and he's going to have the better center as well. So this is really just a bad idea for white. So I would say if you're looking for some kind of lazy way to approach the Alyekin's defense, and you don't want to go for you're trying to avoid all these theoretical lines, don't choose bishop to c4. So you could play knight to c3. That's a reasonable approach. It's not so bad. You can play e5, knight to d5, and knight c3. Okay, it's a reasonable sideline. And frankly, there's just nothing really wrong with playing the main line. I mean, not all of the main lines are super theoretical. So absolutely nothing wrong with that. But bishop to c4 is just not really a very good way of declining it. And it's not just that black equalizes, but black is probably even better in this position. Okay, so we'll continue here and show kind of the full trap. And it's kind of nice. Okay, so e5. And first of all, this is actually a pretty good move, because if queen takes e5, black plays knight to c6, and its development is going to be really rapid. And in fact, white may have some difficulty castling. So this is better for black. So d3 is probably the best move for white, even though it's a bit passive. Okay, knight c6. Knight c3 is probably not the best move for white, but it's okay. It's not horrible. But in any case, black is just better here. Not hugely better, not on the verge of winning, but clearly has the trumps. Bishop pair, better center, and so on. More space too. Okay, so his example continues with this here, castles, bishop d6. And now white should probably play f3. All right, bishop to e3 is the move that he mentions, and this has a pretty serious problem. So see if you can figure out what that really serious problem is. Okay, well, it's just this. Knight f3 check. Now, if white doesn't take, then, well, there's a lot of things that can happen. So after king to h1, probably queen to h4 is pretty good. Might just be winning on the spot. And even if it's not, d4 has got to be pretty good too. So if white wants to have any chance, and it's not really a chance, he should play g takes f3. But after bishop takes f3, is really just dead. I mean, there's just not much to be done about simple queen d2, queen d7, queen g4 check, or queen to h3 with mating ideas on g2. So queen d2, queen d7, and he didn't really specify that it was an actual game. I think it was, but if it was, white resigned here, and rightly so. Again, there's no reasonable defense to the idea of queen h3 followed by queen to g2 mate. So a good little trap for those of you who are Alyekin aficionados to know. Well, it's not really a trap. I mean, it's just kind of calling white's bluff. So after bishop takes c4, you just ought to take the pawn, and white's worse. Okay, on to the next one. All right, this one's kind of cool. Okay, so this is moat against some random master. played in an old game, and it's kind of a neat one. So white was outplayed earlier in the game and reached this position where it's an even, it's a king and pawn ending with even material, but it's not going to be that way for long because black is simply going to round up the e-pawn with king takes e5. But despite this, white actually managed to win the game. Now, white's not winning here, but watch what happens, and you'll see that just by kind of a very natural continuation, he went on to win. So let's see what happened first, and then we'll make the improvements. Okay, so king g6, king e2, king f5, king d3, king e5, and now white heads for the a-pawn. So black retreats, wants to keep it. King b5, king c7, king a6, and now he realizes that, okay, if he plays king to b8, then white plays a5, and he's regaining his material because b takes a5, king a5, and white can't protect both the a7 and c5 pawns. So instead, black played g5. So he realizes he's got this majority, he might as well use it. Okay, white took. Black continued consistently with f5, but now b4. And at this point, black is in fact lost and did go on to lose the game. So here's what happened. f4, b5, good move, g4, a5, and now we see the breakthrough here. f3, a takes check, king d7, swap the f-pawns, both sides queen, but white's just up quite a few pawns here, and the rest was not forced, but reasonably probable here. Okay, now I'm not sure why black doesn't take on b5. Oh, sorry, it's check. Good reason why. So not paying attention here. Yeah, so we should have. Well, okay. So the problem for black here is that he has no place to avoid the check. So he's losing one pawn to the other with check. Okay, yeah. Sorry, I'm thinking about the king and pawn ending and not paying attention to this. Okay, so here, and the problem with this now is that white can trade the queens by force. So queen c8, and black gave up because after queen c8, king e7, queen c7, got a trade. And then white promotes again. Okay, so what exactly did black do wrong here? So he started from this. He's rounding up this pawn. I mean, is it really that bad for white or for black? Well, no. Black should have been winning. And let's start here. So the first thing we can think about is just the basic rule of thumb. Passed pawns must be pushed. So whether black's king goes back to c7 or not, I mean, it didn't really change much. I mean, white still got to play the same set of moves. King b5, king a6, king a7, and then get his a pawn rolling, perhaps with the help of the b pawn. So let's see what happens if we just start pushing our passers right away. So instead of king d6, let's just go g5. All right, well now white maybe has two choices. So one is to play a5, trying to just break up the pawns and keep his king close enough to black's kingside passers that it can stop them, or to play king b5 and just go make a run for it. All right, so let's try a5 first. So f5 takes. Okay, now if king to d3, well, white just loses because he's simply down a pawn, and everything will just be rather routine at this point. So we've got to try the counterattack to have any chance. But now f4 takes, g4 takes, f3 takes, b4, and we queen well ahead, and then probably the simplest move here is queen f3. So we don't even allow the white king to help the b pawn go any further. So this is a trivial win for black at this point. Okay, so after g5, we just looked at a5. So let's see what happens if we play king to b5. So we just go running right over there. Okay, so f5, king a6, f4 takes, g4 takes, f3, and once again, black queen's first. It's closer this time, but once again, that same defensive trick is going to finish the job. So queen to f3, not letting white's king get to b7. You can play queen to a8 next, and it's going to be a very easy win. All right. Also, going back to the game position. So king to d6 is what was played. g5 is what we just looked at. Black can also play f5. Now, if king to b5, we just transpose into the line with g5 straight away. But you might think, well, h4 would be a problem here. But it looks like black is just fine here too. So king f4. Okay, now if king b5, king g3 followed by king g2. So we don't even bother with the g pawn anymore. I mean our g pawn. We just take white's and the f pawn promotes. So that's easy. And if king d5, well, still king g3, king e5, g6, king f6, king g2, king g6, f4, and black wins easily. Okay, so that would have been the best way for black to proceed. So just get the passed pawn created and rolling, and the rest should be simple. Okay, so king to d6 happened, king b5, and again, g5 should be winning here. King c7, king a6. And now, here we have kind of another interesting variation. Now, the margin for error is getting smaller, but black can still win. And the right move here is not g5, though that still wins, but the best is probably h4. Funny move. Okay, so king takes a7. Now we have to make a prophylactic move here with c4. So again, important, we don't allow b4. Okay, so now king a6, threatening king b5, so we stop him. King c6, a5, takes. Okay, now we push. f5, king b4, h3. Okay, so there's the big point. If white plays h3, then g5, and black will still win. Okay, so king b4, h3, g3. Okay, now, very important move again, king d5. Okay, and it's important not so much for the pawn, but to cut white's king off from black's majority. Okay, so b3, takes, check, here, takes. And the reason why I wanted to show this line is because we basically have still one more bonus bit of coverage from last week's lesson. So what black plays here is king c5. So white plays king c3. And it looks like, again, a position where white's got the outside passed pawn. He should be better, but he loses. So, and again, this is a little bit reminiscent of some of the lines from last time. Black doesn't play g5 here, but plays g6. So very important. King d3, g5. And so we force the white king to be further over. It's going to be on c3 rather than d3. I mean, of course, you can go to e3, but king takes c4 becomes a really easy win. So king c3, g4, king d3, f4, and black promotes. White can't stop it. Even if he wants to give up all of his pawns, he still can't stop it. Okay. So that's how we win there. All right. So h4 is winning. But, okay. So g5 is what happened. King takes a7. And here is the last chance after f5, which is a blunder, b4, and white's winning. Black still could have won with c4. So again, an ounce of prevention here is worth a pound of cure. So we don't allow b4 to happen. And, okay, now white is still going to be behind in the race. So king a6, king c6, a5, takes, f5, king b4, king d5. So very similar to what we already saw. b3, takes, f4, king c2, g4, king d2, h4. And again, the outside passed pawn just isn't good enough because of black's various breakthrough combinations. So king d3, king c5, king d2, king c4, king c2. And now with white's king in a very bad spot, h3, gh, and then g3. And white can't prevent black from promoting. Okay, so a very interesting pawn ending, and it's kind of neat how it dovetailed with what we looked at last time. All right, on to the next one. Okay, this is between Whiskey Town and a 2000 player. And, all right, there's a few comments that I want to make about this game. Okay, so first of all, in the opening, so we've got a knight order with bishop to c4, and then in this position, which is a known theoretical position, white played bishop to d3. And so this is a first kind of peculiar move. I mean, if you wanted to put it on d3, you could have done it already, maybe back on move 6. So if you're going to play a bishop to c4 variation, the whole point is to play bishop to b3. Now, black can play b4 and knight takes e4, but that's really extremely risky. And anyway, white gets good play in that variation. But it's a line you should know about. Otherwise, you shouldn't play the bishop to c4 variation, because that e4 pawn can be won by force in many of the main lines, but it's very risky to do so. Okay, so bishop to d3, bishop b7, bishop g5. All right, so here I think white makes another. It's a mistake. Okay, it's more than I think just a little inaccuracy. I think after bishop takes f6, I mean, this you're exchanging off a really very nicely posted piece for, okay, not the most powerful of black's minors, and you're giving up the bishop here in a position where that bishop now on f6 is really well placed. See, back here, it's not really that well placed. And okay, if he wants to put it on f6, he'd have to move the knight away, and then the knight would be kind of misplaced. So I think bishop f6 really is not a good move at all. It helps black considerably. Okay, knight b3, and then here black makes a mistake. You should just play queen to b6 with a nice edge. The problem is that after castles, now, okay, white gets to do several things that are quite favorable. Trades off one of his weaker pieces, and this is the big thing, he does it in a way that really benefits him in terms of the pawn structure. So d takes c5, and now e5. So black has given up his better center. See, one of the things in the Sicilian is that black has this extra pawn in the center, so he's got 2 to just 1 for white, and in the long term, this is really to his advantage. It means that he can slowly but surely, assuming white hasn't done anything in the meantime, and here white has really kind of given up his dynamic potential, in the long run, black will be able to take over the center and enjoy a space advantage, especially in conjunction with the bishop pair. I mean, this is really a fine position for black. He's got everything to look forward to. Whereas now, okay, he's lost his favorable center. In fact, in some ways, white now has the better center, and black's formerly really excellent dark squared bishop has to resume a passive post. Okay, and here black maybe should have played bishop to g5. This would have been better because f4 is met by queen d4 check, and then this guy falls. So bishop to e7 is maybe another inaccurate move. Okay, so rook a to d1, c4, bishop b4, takes, bishop b4. Okay, and now some more inaccuracies. Okay, so in the game, white played rook takes e4, but it's not really clear what the rook is doing on e4 as opposed to on e1. I mean, there's no kingside attack here. I mean, with no queens on the board, not even any bishops on the board, I mean, that's just, you know, a complete non-starter. Well, with knight takes e4, okay, the rook is just as good on e1 as it is on e4, because in both cases it can double. But this knight is much, much better here. So first of all, it avoids the pin that occurs in the game. It clears the path for the pawn to come to c3, which could be useful. No, it's not necessary, but it could be useful. And more to the point, the bishop is dominating, or sorry, the knight's dominating the bishop, and last but not least, the knight might jump into d6 at some convenient moment as well. So rook takes e4 is both not gaining anything for white while taking away some very good possibilities that he could use instead. Okay, bishop to b4 happened, and now another mistake, rook to e3. So this, I would say, is really an outright mistake, and probably the most serious mistake in the game so far, because it's giving up the d file. So the threat, black's threat to double your pawns at this point really isn't all that serious. I would say it would be better to play something like king to f1 and let him give up his bishop for the knight if he wants, especially since you're going to have the d file, better d file control than he will. So I think this fully counterbalances any small advantage he would have in the pawn structure. So after rook to e3, the problem is now after rook a to d8, he's obtained something that I think is quite useful. So here, you probably should play rook e to e2. So not give him the d file. If he doubles pawns, okay, that's life. It's not really such a big deal because there's no really easy way for him to access those pawns. He doesn't have a knight, so there's no knight going to d5 or to a4. He doesn't have a dark squared bishop because he's trading it off. He doesn't have a queen. And okay, he's got rooks, but how are the rooks going to get to a square where they attack that pawn? So I mean, the only way to attack it would be on the c file, but that's closed, or on a square like a3. but there's no sensible way that the rooks could ever get there. So the only thing that's left is the king, but that would take eons for it to get all the way to a5, to a4, to a3, and so on. And you should be able to prevent that from happening. So that would have been better. So instead, rook takes d8. Now you're giving him the file. And kind of the ironic point is that after king f1, rook d2, rook e2, you ended up having to allow him to double your pawns anyway. Okay, so he kept the rook. Okay, now here I would say to play f4 instead of king to e1, because here, this is important, black could have played a good move, g5, trying to artificially isolate this pawn. Whoops, hitting the wrong thing. And then with the idea of maybe playing like this at some point. Now you can prevent that with g4, but then that pawn can become a bit weak as well. So f4 would have been much simpler to play at the earlier point. Okay, so king f8. You got amnesty, so you played f4. Good. King e7. And now I would say you should play rook to d2 immediately if you're going to play it at all. Because now his king isn't going to be as well centralized. And so let's see. Rook takes d2, king takes d2, king d7, king e3, king c6, king d4. And now he can't win with the idea he used in the game. So it's too slow for him to bring his king around, because you're going to play king c5 and king b6 once his king goes to a4, and you'll even be better. So this would have been perfectly good. Rook to d2 here. And if he plays king to d7, whoops, king to d7, not rook, then I think you can take. So here, 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 king c5, f5, and he really can't go too crazy with his king, because e6 will just promote. So I think here too, well, in fact, you're just better in this position, I think, because he's going to get zugzwanged at some point. Your king will get to d4, and then you'll have the upper hand. So rook to d2 would have been a good move. So I mean, g3, there's just no necessity for it. It doesn't really help your position in any way, and it lets him build up free of charge. Okay, so king to d7. Now I would have suggested rook to f2. The idea of bringing your king to e2, where it covers everything, and then you can maybe play rook to f1, rook a1, a4. Things like this become possible. So you're activating your rook while keeping the d-file neutralized. All right, so this I think would have been a safer way to play, and not a bad way to play either. Okay, so rook to d2 I think is a mistake. For one thing, you can probably just trade right now. Takes, king here. Actually, I'm not sure if this is a win or not, but it's very precarious. And the thing is, only you can lose in a position like this. You have to worry about g5 ideas. You have to worry about him still coming over and playing king c5 and b4. And your king only has f3 and e3 to go to. So also another idea he has is to bring a pawn to f5. So maybe play h5, f5, and if you play e takes f6, gf6, and then either play for f5 to create a barrier for your king, or play e5 and create a passer. All kinds of things that he can try to do. And he can try to play again on both sides of the board, try to create a passed e pawn and use that, or again to just try to create a locked position in the center so he has time to go and attack on the queen side. Lots of different plans. So this is whether it's winning or not for him, I'm not sure. I didn't spend enough time to determine that, but it's certainly a poor position for you. Whereas if you play something like rook to f2 and just avoid the exchange, black is a little bit better, but it's a long, long way from being a win. So that's really the thing here. When you're worse in a king and pawn ending, or I'm sorry, let me say, if you have the chance to go into a king and pawn ending where you're worse, then unless you're really, really worse in whatever came before that, you shouldn't do it, because there's no forgiveness. There's no forgiveness in a king and pawn ending, and it's very hard to gain counterplay. All right. Whereas in a rook ending, there are all kinds of chances for counterplay and lots of ways to draw when you're down a pawn in a rook ending, sometimes even down 2 pawns. Your defensive chances are just much, much greater than they are in an ending like this. Okay, so back to the game. Rook d2, king c6. And now, again, this is just definitely losing outright. Rook takes d5. So again, you had to keep the rooks on the board. But what makes this even worse is that you're really helping him to put his king on a great square. So another important point is that when you have a situation where there's an exchange that's possible, don't make that exchange under unfavorable circumstances if you can at all avoid it. So here you're giving black the most favorable possible way of doing it. So you're helping his king to become active while keeping your own king very passive. All right, so this is not the way to do it. Okay, so takes, king f2. And now here black's easiest win is just to grab the center altogether. King to e2, king to e4. Okay, and now there's just all kinds of things for you to worry about. So let's say king e2, h5, and the idea now is to play h4 to take, and then to play g5, and black is going to win a pawn on the king side. So let's say h4 to prevent that. Well, now black remaneuvers the king to g4. f6, got to take, and white runs out of moves here. So if a3, for instance, okay, e5. So we make a passed pawn in the center, and it kind of functions like an outside passed pawn, really. King e4, black grabs both both the g and the h pawn, and then wins with the h pawn. So if he goes back, though, same thing's going to end up happening anyway, and black wins. Okay, so that was what happens on a3. If king f2, well, king g4, same idea, e5, and black is going to win with this e pawn, because at some point white's going to have to take it and lose his kingside pawns in the meantime, and then the h pawn is going to cost cost white his entire queenside. So just to show a sample variation, let's say king e3, here, takes, here. Do this. What's best? Okay, we'll go up one more rank. And now away the black king goes over to the queen side, and white just loses everything. And okay, king b2, and we can take the a pawn if we want to, but simplest is just a queen. So that's the basic idea. Alrighty, so going back here, king e4 would have been simplest, and this is a good rule of thumb. Whoever in a king and pawn ending with, let's say, everything basically equal, I mean, what we see here would have applied even if white's pawn were back on b2. In fact, that would actually be worse, because then there might be king e4 d3 possibilities. But ignoring that, what we just saw would apply whether white's queenside pawn structure was damaged or not. So in a king and pawn ending where the pawn structure is basically more or less even, the side that has the further advanced king is better. One rank better is usually worth something. 2 ranks better is almost always going to just be an outright win. Okay, but black chose a different plan, and this seems to be good enough to win too, frankly. So you played a3, and this loses, as we saw in the game like this. He just goes and grabs the pawn, and he gets there first. So this is the game, and white resigned here. But even if you didn't play a3, it's still losing. So king e3, b4, which is probably why you played a3. And it looks like it's a win for black no matter what. So if pawn takes, for example, c3. And here, again, it's going to be an outside passed pawn situation where it should win. And at some point, white is going to have to step onto the a-file to deal with black's passed pawn, and then black takes the c-pawn and then goes on a diagonal food festival here, grabbing all these pawns. So the moral of the story in this ending is certainly not to go into a worse king and pawn ending if it can be avoided without great cost, and also not to make exchanges where you do it in a way that favors your opponent. So that's a rule that's useful pretty much at any point throughout a game. Okay, so on to the next one. All right, so this is an ICC game, a simul between a 2400 and Nazgul. I assume it's not Nazgul from ICC, who's a grandmaster, but that's his nickname on the chess video server. Anyway, he had black, and didn't really want to say too much about this game. It's just kind of a cute. Well, what was kind of funny about it is that it was black got to take seconds of a certain combinational idea, which is kind of rare, but it's amusing when it happens. Okay, so this is a known line. I think the main move here is c4 and then h3. Not a big deal. Okay, bishop to e6. I think 95 is theory, but it's not that major a line, but it's useful, I guess, if you play it to know it. Okay, now here white should have played probably c4, and it's just to get this queen off this very nicely centralized location, and it prepares bishop to b2, putting the bishop on a good diagonal. Alright, so instead white played rook to b1, black played knight e5, and here white missed the threat. Played knight to d, or should have played knight to d4, but instead played queen takes e2. Okay, so quick question. What should black to move do here? Well, the answer is bishop takes h3. Pretty simple tactic. If g takes h3, then knight f3 check followed by various discoveries should prove quite good. Knight to d4 most obviously. But also even knight to d2 and grab the rook might be perfectly good as well. So white played f3. And actually, as it turns out, this really wasn't such a big deal yet. So white's out a pawn, but he still has some reasonable compensation because, okay, after bishop to e6, here he should play rook to, I'm sorry, not bishop to a3, but rook to d1, threatening various discoveries. And, okay, a little problem for black is that this knight on e5 is loose too. So if the queen runs away, it's hard to find a good square for it to run where it keeps the knight protected. So the best is probably knight takes d3, and then after c takes d3, white's managed to fix his broken pawn structure. And so even though he's a pawn down, the opposite color bishops make the position still pretty unclear. White has compensation for the material, I would say. Alright, so instead he played bishop to a3, black played knight h5, threatening a couple of nifty knight jumps to f4 and especially to g3. So white played queen f2. I think queen to e3 was probably a little bit better, but okay, nothing too seriously wrong with queen f2. Knight d3, cd, knight f4, and now with knight to d4, again black would just be a little bit better, not dramatically better. But instead he played d4. Okay, well now what should black play? Well, the answer, and it's pretty amusing, is bishop to h3 once again. So it's rare that you find the same trick happening twice in the same game, but here it is. And it's easier for white to miss because it didn't take a pawn on h3 this time. So kind of, I think that if there was still a pawn on h3, probably the person giving the simul would have seen it, or at least would have had a much better chance of seeing it. But kind of funny, no pawn there. You don't expect the bishop to go there, and it did. And white fell apart here. I mean, he's worse, but didn't have to lose in two more moves. So bishop takes, rook over, king h2, rook takes, and he resigned because after rook e7, gh3, rook e2 wins the queen. All right, so kind of a cute little trap there. And again, I think the double dipping was an amusing feature of the game. All right, now this one's kind of neat. So here we have an ending between Bosi Clint and an international master named Martinez. And okay, here's this game. So our questioner, our viewer, was white in the game, and what he was really curious about was this position. Now in the game he played king to e1 and lost fairly straightforwardly. So black grabbed the pawn, and the passed g pawn is just too strong here. And now with two connected passed pawns, it's not too difficult to win. Okay, and that's the final position. White gave up here because g4 followed by bishop to h2 is going to win. All right, but what he was curious about is, well, in this position, what if queen takes f3? And let me invite you guys to work this out for yourselves. So see if you can figure out how black can win this, if you can win it. Okay. Now, I'm not sure if e takes f3 is a win. It may well be, but I decided to try g takes f3 first, and since I found a win with that, I didn't bother with e takes f3. But that deserves to be looked at as well. All right, just not going to be looked at by me on this occasion. Okay, so g takes f3, king f2, king f5, and now we've got to figure out, first of all, what is white going to do. Okay, well, black's plan, first of all, is to play king to g4 and then try to load up on this pawn. Okay, so that's one very basic idea. So a move that comes to mind here for white is bishop to a5. Now, if black tries to prevent the bishop from getting on this diagonal with a move like e5, then after d5, white is now equal. Okay, in fact, white has 2 passed pawns of his own. Black only has 1. So this really is not the way for black to handle the position. So let's see what happens. So king to g4, and now, okay, we've got 2 key variations from here. All right, well, let's start with bishop to c7, simply protecting the g pawn. White's going to wait and see what black has to offer. All right, so bishop to g5, bishop to b8, so we just sit and wait, king h3, and now all of a sudden it transpires that black has a decisive threat. And we'll see what that threat is if white just continues to waste time with bishop to e5. Black can play bishop takes e3 check, king e3, and king g2, and white's defenseless against f2, f1, queen. So white really doesn't have any choice here. He's got to play bishop to f4 to stop that threat. There's just nothing else to be done about it. But now, okay, after bishop takes f4, white loses after both recaptures. But it's interesting. Okay, so e takes f4 is not really interesting. Simply king to g4, say d5, e3, takes, and black queens first, just f2, f1. But after g takes f4, it proves to be pretty interesting still. So this wouldn't be a bad exercise to work on either. So if you haven't figured this position out already in your analysis of our original stopping point, and see if you can work out how black wins here. Well, there's nothing for the king to do where it is, so it's got to move someplace else. And that ultimate destination is going to be d3 and try to win by Zugzwang. So king g4, king g1, king f5, king f2, king e6, king f1, king d5, king f2, king c4, king f1, king d3, and now, okay, we've got another position of interest. Okay, so what if we just wait? So king f2. Well, here, black plays e6, and now retreating with the king makes no sense. Black just takes the e pawn, and his own attack is going to be faster. So we should try to counterattack now for white. So let's try first of all f5. Okay, on f5, e takes f5, d5, and we've got to break through here. So f4. Okay, if e takes f4, e3, and black queen's in plenty of time to stop white's pawns. Okay, so d6, f takes e3 check, and now white's problem is that his king has no safe squares. I mean, if it could go to g2, then it might be a draw, or at least he would have chances to fight, because he would get to queen after white does. But the problem is every square he goes to, he's going to get checked on. So if king to g3, e2, d7, queen, and then the queen goes to a5 and the pawn stopped. Okay, so king to e1. Well, now white come in with either e2 with the idea that d7, king e3, d8 queen, f2 is mate, or play f2 check, and then e2 check, and win like this. And then the queen goes to h4 and stops white from queening safely. All right, so that's that. Okay, that's king e1. White can also try king g3. And now, okay, e2, d7, queen. Oh, no, I'm sorry, we did this line already. Yeah, what I wanted to go back to was, instead of f5, which we just looked at, d5. Okay, and now it's a little bit more interesting. So e takes d5, f5, D4. So everything's the same so far. F6, DE. Again, white's king has to go to a square where it's going to get checked. But okay, well that's what would be true. That's what would be true on king to G3. But now king to E2 is more interesting, because here, okay, after E2, F7, king E3 would be a colossal blunder, because after white queens, the F2 square is covered. So black has to play E3, queen, F2, and black has one pawn left, and this one queens, and he wins. So, okay, that seems to be a winning line for, well, it is a winning line for black. All right, and that is with, okay, that was here. That was with white playing bishop to C7, and so on. But there's one other very interesting line, and that's with D5. So here we're trying to figure out, well, what happens if white just gives up the G3 pawn and tries to hold the position? And it turns out that this is actually pretty interesting, and it's a very nice win that black has that could easily be missed. Okay, bishop to B6, bishop G3 check, king F1, king F5, bishop A7. And it's not necessarily so easy for black's king to cross the equator. So let's just try E6. So takes, bishop D4. Okay, now what is black going to do? Well, there's nothing to be done on the king side. I mean, white's king is just going to sit on F1. And if he plays, let's say he brings the king to a square like G4 and plays F2, well, then white plays king to G2 and draws. So there's nothing to be done there. So we should bring the king to D3. We wait. Okay. But now, how does black win in this position? So let me definitely encourage you guys to stop the recording here and try to figure out how in the world black can win in this position. Okay, well, it doesn't look easy to see the answer to this at all. If the bishop goes to a square like D2 or to C1 or G5 or H6, simply king to F2 is going to draw. One idea might be to bring instead to play something like king C4 and try to force the bishop to, let's say, through whatever means. Okay, I mean there'll be some way to let me get rid of all these arrows here. So king C4, you maneuver the bishop to C5, and okay, white will have played king to F2 by that point, and then you bring your king back to D3. Okay, so then white will have his bishop bounce around to a square like H3. But then it doesn't seem like it's any easier to win from that position. So, okay, white's got a different blockade, but it's not clear how you break that one either. So what's the answer? Well, it might be the only answer, but it's certainly the most elegant by far. It's really beautiful. You play bishop to H2. What in the world is the idea of this? Well, you might be able to figure it out now. Bishop to D4, and then bishop to D1, G1, excuse me. So, beautiful idea. So you don't allow king to F2. I mean, that's the whole point of this crazy little setup. So, if the pawn falls, it's an easy win. And if king takes G1, king E2, and the bishop on D4 is completely worthless. So that's how black wins there. And I don't think that white has any way of stopping either, this particular win or the win that we looked at a few moments before that. So I think even with queen takes F3 check, it would have been a more difficult win, but I think there is a win nonetheless. So a very interesting ending, though, and I'm glad you submitted this. Okay, on to the next one. Okay, there's a game between William Morton and Terry Wright, and it's an interesting game. It's kind of a model French game in some respects, although I think white is actually probably not in desperate shape until pretty near the very end. But while it's quite interesting, and I think it's worth looking at as, again, a kind of a model of how black can try to play for a win in certain variations of the advanced French, I'm not going to cover it here. So on to the next one, which I think is the last one. Oh, and this is, kind of a nifty, tactics-laden battle between Guitar Cameron and an anonymous player. Okay, so let's take a quick look here. So a fun line against a side line of the center counter, or the Scandinavian. Okay, and black's castling queenside is really kind of asking for trouble here, and white plays very well. Okay, so of course we're building up here. Black grabs a pawn, and now the fun starts. So it was a good pawn sack, and okay, with rook to c1, white is just clearly better here. It's got lots of pressure on the black queen side. Black's kingside pieces are undeveloped, and yeah, man, it's really asking for trouble. Okay, so queen to d8, and now knight to g5 should be clearly better for white, but knight to e5 in conjunction with his follow-up looks like it's pretty darn good too. Okay, so the threat is to play knight f7, of course, and that's what he would play on bishop takes e2, I would assume, though maybe bishop to f4 could be interesting as well. Anyway, black played bishop to e6, and now white finds a very nice move, without which I think this whole approach would definitely be inferior to knight to g5. But with it, it probably is the best way to play. Okay, so the move he plays here is quite good. Rook to c6. Now, obviously, the rook can't be taken because, well, knight takes c6 and then knight takes the queen on d8. But it's a good move all the same, adding to the pressure against the knight on b6 and threatening not only, or maybe not especially, bishop takes b6, but rook takes b6. And black is in desperate trouble here. Probably his best is bishop to d6, and then white should make the sacrifice that I just mentioned. Rook takes b6, AB, bishop takes b6, and okay. Probably best is just to give up the queen here. Queen b6, bishop b5, and white should win this in the long run, but black can still resist. I mean, there's still work for white to do. All right, in the game, black played d4, blocking that line of attack, but giving up some other things. So now bishop to f4 comes with tempo. Black rightly plays king to a8, but now white makes a big mistake. So the only mistake, but it was a mistake. Okay, so what's the best move here? What is the best move here? Okay, well, I would say the answer is bishop to f3. So you're just using all of the pieces, and it's very nice aesthetically as well, in part because it shows that the rook can be left in pre here. So if, for example, bc, bishop takes c6 check, and then knight to d7 is mate. Oh, I'm sorry, it's not mate. Mate next move. Queen to a6. Okay, so yeah, it's too bad. Would have been nice to have the double check be a mate, but that's good enough. Okay, so he can't take the rook, and but now, of course, white is threatening more things, and he's threatening also the idea that happens in the game too, as we'll see. So here, our viewer played knight takes f7, which is a pretty heroic idea, but it doesn't work. So see if you can figure out why it doesn't work. What's the problem with this? So in the game, his opponent was bluffed and played queen to e8, and now after rook takes b6, he's dead. Bishop to c5 is what he chose, and now another nice shot. Rook takes b7, with the point that if king takes, then queen to a6 check, only move is king to a8, and then bishop to f3 forces mate in 2 more moves after a couple of spite interpositions. So after rook takes b7, black played bishop to c8 and got mated with rook to b8. So very nice attack, very nice game. But let's go back to this position here after knight f7. Black could have played bishop takes f7. Now this looks bad because of bishop to c7 followed by bishop takes b6, and it looks like white just has an overwhelming array of threats. But it turns out, surprisingly, I mean, look at a position like this, it doesn't look like the queen is going to protect the pawn on a7, but it does. So bishop takes b6, b takes c6, and it's a big oops. White's just losing here. So I assume that something like this was missed by both players. Instead of bishop to c7, white could have played bishop to f3, but with bishop to d5, oh, okay, notice, by the way, oops. Yeah, if white's bishop were on f3 here, then bishop takes c6 check would just be immediately winning. So that's yet another reason for bishop to f3 in the position where white played knight takes f7. Okay, and I was going to say that even here, instead of bishop to c7, bishop to f3 is a better try, but after bishop to d5, bishop c7, queen d7, okay, the rook's got to retreat, takes, and we regain the piece. But now black has managed to finish his development and stop white's threats, and even though material's even, it's now black who has the better position. So knight takes f7 was a serious error. A great idea, though, and overall it was a very, very nice attack. So it's definitely a game you can feel good about, though this, okay, there is a flaw. So bishop to f3 would have been best, and then everything is just firing on all cylinders. Okay, so I think that's everything. Whoops. I think that's all the games that I was going to cover, all the games that are there. And hope you enjoyed this. So I won't do it again for quite a while. Don't be in a rush to add more games. So we'll stick to the viewer questions approach for now. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed it. Let me remind everybody to check out my blog, chessmind.powerblogs.com. The blog's good, and also you're all welcome to contact me for lessons. I give them as well. Not for free, but I give them. And so anyway, check that out. You can write me through my blog on the contact link, or even on here, but the blog is probably better. Anyway, that's it. I'll see you next week. Until then, good luck. Goodbye.